Hello, everyone. Chris Green, Friday afternoon, and a little, welcome to everyone. It's I guess it's that weekly little chat where I explore some of the events that happened in British history back in the past in this week. So welcome, and I can see the chat box is people are already chatting away, and it's lovely. People are greeting each other, and there's almost people sort of feel like they know each other, which is sort of. Yeah, it's one of the things I always wanted to do when I set up the History Chap was just having that sense of community and people, like-minded people who enjoy studying history, enjoy hearing different perspectives, and and here we all are, Friday afternoon, live from Worcester. So hello everyone, hello Jen, hello Terry, Mike the Disabled Welshman, Leslie over in South Carolina, lovely to see you. Who else we've got? We've got Grant over in Norway. That's amazing. So Dalton's here as well from Toronto, Canada. So that's absolutely fantastic. So I'm going to give it a couple of moments before we look at all the events that happened in British history, or some of the events that happened in British history back in this week. Just so we get a few folk signing up, joining, because there's always a few Johnny-come-latelys, isn't there? So for those of you who haven't normally seen one of these, and certainly those of you who are seeing the recording later, don't unsubscribe or anything. If you don't like this sort of live chat and a little bit more jazz than my regular videos, then just go and have a look at one of my regular videos. There's a link to my channel below. And of course, there's a link to my latest video, last night's main video, all about the life of Thomas Cochrane. I don't know what people thought about Thomas Cochrane. He was most certainly Patrick O'Brien's model for Jack Aubrey, Master and Commander, and also C.S. Forester's Horatio Hornblower. So, as I say, if you don't like live chats like this, pop over and watch that one. All scripted, lots of lovely visuals. This is not lots of lovely visuals. You're looking at me, and this is much more like if we were in a coffee shop or at the pub or something like that. So let me just have a quick look and say hello to a few folk. We've got Edward, Oklahoma City. Wow, that's impressive. Don't know what time it is over there. Houston. We do have a fair few Americans come on these calls, don't we? And it's great. It's great. I've got cousins, or actually second cousins, over in Colorado. And it's brilliant when we talk British history, and they've got kids now, and they couldn't believe when I lived in Nantwich up in Cheshire just how old Nantwich was and how all these buildings were sort of still being used. Whereas in America, of course, most of those buildings in Nantwich, or the centre of Nantwich, are older than anything that's in North America. So I love sharing British history with my North American friends. So yeah, there you go. So hello, folks. So by all means, please put in the world where you're from. I always love to know that. Maybe it's been brought up in South Africa. I'm just always intrigued where people live in the world. And a special shout out. Don't know if he's going to be watching today, but to Logan. Logan has got in touch with me. He's one of my many viewers. Logan's 13. And he is going to try and put together a video this weekend about the Zulu Wars, the Battle of Isandlwana, which, I mean, look forward to seeing it. I love the Zulu Wars, as well, but, hats off, 13-year-old having a go at making a video on YouTube. Good luck to him. Good luck to him. And if you're watching, Logan, good luck to you. All right. So, and I can see we've got sunny Edinburgh, although Michael, you're not saying it is sunny Edinburgh up there, but hello, Kieran saying I went to school in Nantwich. I'd like to know which school it was, Kieran, and how long ago, dare I ask. So, and Kieran's in Buckinghamshire, super duper. Nantwich Acton Grammar School. Thank you, Kieran. I'm guessing that's what NAG stands for. I'm guessing. But anyway, and Michael Blaine saying it is sunny for once in Edinburgh. Well, there you go. Right, folks. So this week I have got loads to share with you from British history, things that happened this week in British history. I'll give you top line headlines now. Okay, it's a week of 3 coronations, all on the same day, actually. The most coronations, the most popular day for coronations in English and British history. So there you go. The Yanks, you'll like this one. The Yanks over here, we have John Paul Jones, not the rock drummer, but the American naval commander actually invading Britain, attacking Britain up at Whitehaven, Genuine like this, up in Cumbria. So we'll share that little bit of a story with you. The only time that Americans have ever actually landed on the shores of Britain in hostility. We have Luftwaffe air raids in the Second World War based upon a tourist guidebook. I kid you not. The Baedeker raids, I'm going to introduce you to those as well. And then just for something slightly different, we have the 1908 London Olympics opening, the first of the 3 Olympics that London's hosted, but very different to the last ones in 2012. And we've got the 1924 British Empire exhibition being held, sort of a sequel to the Great Exhibition in the Crystal Palace in Hyde Park back in the 1850s. And what else we have as well, especially for my American friends here, we have the D-Day disaster, or the disaster before D-Day, the exercise Tiger, where over 700 American servicemen were killed in live practices before D-Day, killed by friendly fire, and also German E-boats that managed to get in amongst the landing craft. And I'll be sharing that one with you as well. How's that for a start off for 10? Has that got people? Has that whetted people's appetites for what we'll be covering today? Don't know if there's any of theirs. QA Library, Leslie has said Slapton Sands. You're absolutely right, Leslie. It is Slapton Sands. We'll get that. John Bonham was the drummer. Thank you very much indeed. So what was John Paul Jones? I don't know. I'm going mad. Right. Warcry, Gallipoli. I will mention Gallipoli, but only very, very, very quickly today, only because it deserves a story in its own right. Yeah, we've got the landings at Gallipoli. Okay, they were going to be mentioned. Okay, so there we go. So let's kick off then, folks, with the beginning of the week. I'm going to go in chronological order, as in the dates, the days of this week, okay, rather than jumping around, doing it in a historic timeline, okay? Maybe that's good, maybe it's bad, but at least this way we jump around a little bit and we're not locked in Anglo-Saxons or Victorians or whatever it is, and you're sitting there waiting for your favourite bit of British history. So let's kick off. Back on Sunday this week, 21st of April, 1509, Henry VIII came to the throne, ascended the throne on the death of his father, Henry VII. Of course, interestingly, Henry VIII was never intended, he was never initially the heir to the English throne. He had an older brother, if you remember from one of my previous talks, Arthur, Prince Arthur. Arthur died, he was the Prince of Wales, and he died at Ludlow Castle, buried here in Worcester Cathedral. If ever you come visit Worcester, his tomb is in the cathedral here, along with King John's. But so Henry VIII was initially the Duke of York, the spare, and but obviously he then became the heir when the heir presumptive when his brother died, and of course he married his brother's wife, Catherine of Aragon. So there you go. Now, also on this date, 21st of April, another person who should never have been the monarch was born. 21st of April, 1926, the future Queen Elizabeth II is born. And of course, at this time, her father, funny enough, he was also a Duke of York. He became George VI, but of course, at the time, her grandfather, George V, was on the throne. We'll be talking about George V later today. And and her uncle, who became Edward VIII, was, he was Prince of Wales, the golden child of the royal family, the great hope. But of course, it all ended in disaster when he married, or wanted to marry, Wallis Simpson. And interestingly, and therefore her father took over the throne, didn't he, as George VI, and Queen Elizabeth became Queen Elizabeth II on his death. What's interesting, actually, is had Edward VIII remained on the throne and was allowed somehow to either marry Wallis Simpson or indeed decided to get shot at Wallis Simpson because he wanted the throne more, which wasn't the case, he never had any children. We never had any children with Wallis Simpson. So when he died in the 1970s, his heir would have been the Princess Elizabeth. So Queen Elizabeth II would have still ended up on the throne, just 20 years later than she did. So there you go, Elizabeth II. 22nd of April, 1778. John Paul Jones of the US Navy attacks Whitehaven in Cumbria. This was obviously during the American Wars of Independence. And John Paul Jones actually was born in Scotland. Didn't like his laird up in Scotland, the Earl of Selkirk, and basically joined the Merchant Navy. Ended up over in the colonies, and when the colonies rebelled, he wholeheartedly got behind the independence movement in the USA over in North America. He was a merchant seaman, so he naturally joined the Congressional Navy at the time, and in the USS Ranger, he decided to take the war to the British by crossing the Atlantic and attacking Britain. And the port he initially decided on was Whitehaven in Cumbria, which, I knew you'd like that one, Jen. But Whitehaven, who's at the time, it's a pretty sleepy little port now, but at the time, a major port. And when John Paul Jones rocks up in the USS Ranger, there were 400 merchant ships in Whitehaven. So a great prize, both to attack Whitehaven itself, but if you could burn some of those ships, that's a great thing as well, and you've always got to remember, ships are part of commerce, obviously, and if you can hurt them, you hurt a country's finances. And we're sort of seeing a similar sort of thing happening with the Houthis attacking ships in the Red Sea. And I was reading this week that traffic through the Suez Canal has dropped significantly because of the Houthi attacks. So John Paul Jones was making a statement, but also attacking commerce. That was his intention. In the early hours of the 22nd of April, 1778, he came ashore in two boats, rowing boats from his ship, about 30 men. The two boats were going to attack. There were two forts protecting Whitehaven Harbour, so one on the north side, one on the south side, and each boat was going to attack a fort. It happened at John Paul Jones's. He attacked, I think it was the South Fort. He captured that. But the guys who were supposed to be attacking the other fort got scared off and basically came rowing back over to John Paul Jones and said, "Oh no, we're not attacking." John Paul Jones basically then set fire to the fort that he had captured, and that fire actually started to engulf the rest of the town. So Whitehaven was on fire thanks to John Paul Jones. Having attacked Whitehaven, maybe not quite got the achievement that he wanted, but still an achievement. Pretty audacious to turn up and attack someone else's town like that when you're in rebellion. Imagine the Zulus turning up with a fleet and attacking Southampton or Portsmouth in the 1870s or something. It would have been one in the eye. He then went on. He decided it was time to repay a visit on his on the Earl of Selkirk. He decided he would kidnap the Earl of Selkirk, principally because he thought he was a reasonably important person, member of the nobility, and he would trade him. He'd do a prisoner swap for American naval prisoners. So he was going to do a prisoner swap. And again, we've seen that played out in recent years and in recent times as well, haven't we, folks? But he landed on the coast up in Scotland, got to Earl of Selkirk's house, only to find the Earl of Selkirk wasn't there. It's all about the details, isn't it? So Earl of Selkirk sort of wasn't there. So John Paul Jones nicked most of the silver that was in his house, all the silverware, the candelabras, the dinner services, etc. Famously, John Paul Jones the following year, 1779, actually had a showdown with a Royal Naval ship in the North Sea, and that was the famous occasion where he'd been bombarded by HMS Serapis and was called upon to surrender. And he famously said, I haven't even begun to fight yet. And he turned the tables. And actually, it was HMS Serapis who surrendered to John Paul Jones. Good little story. Maybe I should do a little bit on John Paul Jones and his attacks on Britain and the Royal Navy and Whitehaven as a proper video on YouTube. I don't know what you think. By all means, put a comment in. Where we're at here, folks. Thank you. We've got John Paul Jones. He was bass guitar. Thank you very much for that. Uncle Heavy agrees with my day-by-day approach. Thank you very much. As I said, we've Uncle Heavy, you saw the bio on Thomas Cochrane yesterday. What an interesting life he had. Didn't he just? I wonder what he'd have done to John Paul Jones had he been in the Royal Navy a little bit earlier. John Paul Jones versus Thomas Cochrane. Now, that would be a battle, wouldn't it? Right. So there you go. I'm getting a few folks saying, yes, please do something on John Paul Jones. Cool one. So just in passing, okay, 22nd of April in 1951, the beginning of the Battle of Imjim River. And of course, within that battle, there was the last stand of the glorious Gloucesters. And down below, I've put a link into that video. Did that about 2 years ago. Fascinating story, incredible story of bravery. One which I know a lot of Americans, the Korean War is a big thing in America still. And the memorial in Washington is incredible. But I have to say, Korean War in the UK is something that's, it's sort of brushed over. If you went down the street in Britain, most Brits wouldn't even know we'd been in Korea. But what's really interesting is, having done that video about the Imjim River, how many comments I get on YouTube from South Koreans who are grateful to the British and to all the other nations who came and defended South Korea. And they've certainly, in South Korea, have a very different country and setup now and lifestyle to their countrymen, really, in the north of Korea. So that's quite interesting, just how people in the south of Korea certainly haven't forgotten, obviously, the sacrifices that were made on their behalfs by the Americans, by the British, and by a lot of other nations that were there as well, including the Australians. People forget the South Africans were there as well, and other nations. The Filipinos had a big contingent. The Belgians, very brave during this Battle of Imjim River, played a crucial role in getting some of the British out. They held a position so the British could withdraw, obviously not the glorious Gloucesters. But there were some other nations there as well. How about the Ethiopians? The Ethiopians were there fighting in the UN army. Indians were there as well. So there you go. So anyway, if you haven't watched it before, please have a little look at the Battle of Imjim River later. I enjoyed doing that video. Great story. And a great visit down to Worcester to the Gloucesters, sorry, down to Gloucester to the museum of the Gloucestershire Regiment down by Gloucester Quays, and indeed into the cathedral to see the chapel where their colours are, but also where a small stone cross was made by the commander-in-chief, or the commander of the Gloucester Regiment, who was held in captivity in North Korea. And he carved this small cross, almost like a Celtic cross, in stone while he was in North Korea, in a North Korean prison camp. There you go. Right. Give me one moment. I'm just getting myself some water, and I've gone and stuck it over here. Desperately trying to drink a bit more water in my life. More water, less alcohol. But the coffee, that's still going strong. But there you go. Right. 23rd of April. It's St. George's Day, folks, and a big day in England. Obviously, St. George is the national saint of the patron saint, of England. Hasn't always been, but has been since the 14th century. And Al Murray, the comedian, does a fantastic skit on the various British patron saints, and of course he points out that St. George has absolutely diddly squat to do with England. Of course, he wasn't. He was from Turkey. Oh, sorry, he was certainly based in Turkey. In Roman times, in the 300s, he was martyred there, and he never killed a dragon because they don't exist. And he never came to England, and as far as we know, he never met an Englishman or a Briton. So an interesting choice, but he was seen as a chivalrous person and was picked up in early medieval times, not least by King Edward III, who sort of moved him to becoming England's patron saint. Because up until then, both Edward the Confessor and Edmund, the king martyr of East Anglia, had been the sort of the unofficial patron saints of England. Interestingly, at Agincourt, when Henry V went into battle, he had the flag of St. George, but also carried into battle alongside the flag of St. George, which was the main patron saint by then, still were the flags of Edward the Confessor and Edmund the Martyr. So St. George's Day became, as I say, Edward III was a massive fan of St. George, saw it as part of his sort of chivalric New England that he was trying to create in the Middle Ages. I've seen a saucy comment there from Uncle Heavy. Edward III was creating this new chivalric Britain. That's what he was trying to create. And part of that was that he wanted to form a group of knights. Sort of like back in the day, like that round table and all this sort of King Arthur stuff that was coming up by then and becoming the legend that we now know of these chivalric knights. And Edward III really big into that, and he actually fancied forming. He founded on St. George's Day, 23rd of April, 1348. He founded a small group of knights, the Knights of the Garter. The Knights of the Garter is the most senior English heraldic honor that you can achieve, order that you can achieve. It's if you've ever seen pictures, they wear a blue ground. It's very there's only 26 members of the Knights of the Garter. A Knight of the Garter is seen by the letters KG after their name. They're based at St. George's Chapel in Windsor Castle. This is the whole tie-in with St. George here. Their day Garter Day is St. George's Day, the 23rd of April. And as I say, 24 members plus the monarch and the Prince of Wales. It's interestingly, there's an interesting story. Those of you who watched the Cochrane story, Thomas Cochrane, yesterday, will notice that Thomas Cochrane was thrown out of the Order of the Bath, which is another chivalric order in Britain. Not as senior, one of the most senior, but not as senior as the Knights of the Garter. If you remember, Cochrane was thrown out of the Knights of the Garter after the fraud, when he was convicted of fraud on the London Stock Exchange. And his banner was taken down from the Order of the Bath's chapel in Westminster Abbey and physically kicked down the nave and out of the door. That is actually a punishment for being kicked off an order. And funny enough, that also happened in the Knights of the Garter. About 100 years before Cochrane's demise from the Order of the Bath, the Duke of Ormond in Ireland. He was an Irish duke, but he was kicked out as a Knight of the Garter in 1716, having supported the 1715 Jacobite rebellion. So there you go. Current members, as I say, small select group, only 24 common members are allowed. You do have some extras from the royal family sometimes and from other royal families across Europe. But the current members, as I said, there's 24, but only 21 at the moment. There's a couple of vacancies, 3 vacancies. But they include, current people include John Major, Tony Blair. But better than that, Andrew Lloyd Webber. There you go. He's a member of the Knights of the Garter. Small select, and it's appointed by the monarch. Absolutely the gift of the monarch. So there you go. St. George's Day wouldn't be complete without the one and only William Shakespeare. Shakespeare most certainly died on this date in 1616, but it's always proclaimed that he was born on this date as well in 1564. Certainly he was baptized a few days later, so there's no official record that he was born on the 23rd of April, but it's always claimed that he was, and it fits very nicely, England's great poet and playwright, with St. George's Day. Wrote 38 plays during his lifetime, or 38 that are credited to him, although of course there's always been debate about did he get help, or indeed are they all written by him, but 38 is what is officially classified as. In a 2016 YouGov poll, the average Brit has read or seen 5 Shakespeare plays. Which any thoughts as to which is the most watched and most popular Shakespeare play? Go on, give me a few. Chuck in your ideas. What do you think is the most popular in the British that YouGov poll in 2016? Brits, what is their most favourite Shakespeare play? We've got Uncle Heavy's leapt in there with Macbeth. Blubbery's gone with Macbeth as well. Blimey, we're all on a Macbeth fest here. Macbeth, Henry V, Macbeth, the Scottish play. Hamlet, King Lear, Henry V. Oh, another advert's appeared. Sorry, guys, I'm not aware of that one over here. Henry V. Actually, most popular play in the British public is Romeo and Juliet. There you go, Romeo and Juliet. So now, 23rd of April is the most popular day, apart from Romeo and Juliet. 23rd of April is the most popular day for British coronations or English coronations. They've actually been 3 coronations on the 23rd of April, St. George's Day. Starting 1661, King Charles II. 1685, his brother, James II. And in 1702, James's daughter, Queen Anne. So I'm not going to go into much more than that. It's the most popular date for a day for coronations. That holds the record still to this day. Okay, three coronations all on the 23rd of April. But a nice little one for you to probably be able to go down the pub or bore your friends and family with over this weekend. Did you know? And if you can remember the names, Charles II, James II, Queen Anne. And there would have been some symbolism to the fact it was St. George's Day as well. Quick one here. I know we've got Don Gardner's on here. I've seen Daryl's on here. Thank you very much. I've seen Leslie. Just want to say thanks to all my my supporters who joined my membership club on YouTube, and also to my patrons like Jen. Jen's a member of my supporters club over on my website, thehistorychap.com. They get some different goodies to what we get here on YouTube. So thank you very much to everyone who is supporting me there, and a shout out to you. I've got one more for the 23rd of April. Busy day, right? 23rd of April, 1924. The British Empire exhibition opens. I don't know if you even know that there was a British Empire exhibition. We've all heard of the Great Exhibition in the 1850s. You know, Queen Victoria, Prince Albert, Queen Victoria, Prince Albert, the Paxton's Crystal Palace in Hyde Park. In fact, funny enough, actually, that opened next week in British history. And I will talk about that because I think it's a fascinating thing. But the British Empire exhibition was supposed to be a sort of a sequel to the Great Exhibition. It was sort of dreamt up, actually. It was dreamt up right at the beginning of the 20th century by the British Empire League, who was this lobby group, club, who obviously wanted to support, preserve, extend the British Empire. And they recognised that Britain was starting to lose its mantle. It's the Americans in particular, the Germans were on the rise industrially and militarily. In the Far East, Japan was on the rise. It's Britain's golden era that had sort of almost the Great Exhibition in the 1850s has sort of symbolised, was already in decline. The Boers had just given the British a real good run for their money in the Boer War. Most of Europe hated Britain because of the Boer War. If you remember, a couple of weeks ago, I talked about how the Prince of Wales, future Edward VII, was nearly assassinated in Brussels by someone, an anarchist, who was supporting the Boers. They didn't realise the anarchists were supporting them, but there you go. So they had this idea that it should be a British Empire exhibition, really to bring all the goodness of the British Empire together, to show everyone in Britain how useful the empire was, to show all the imperial countries, not least the dominions like Canada, Australia, South Africa, New Zealand, Newfoundland, that the mother country needed them, they needed the mother country. Interestingly, it was initially the initial idea was at the beginning of the 20th century. It got postponed because of the Russo-Japanese War. Then they revived the idea about 10 years later, 1913. They were going to have another one, or at least they were pushing for it. And of course, the First World War came along, put a bit of a kibosh on that one. And eventually they went for it in the early 1920s. And it was, as I say, it was really a PR exercise to show people how, the value of the empire, but also it was a message to the empire that, we're all in it together, better together than thinking about things like independence. Don't forget, by now, Ireland was the Irish Free State, or Southern Ireland was the Irish Free State era. So already and Britain had already made a commitment to certainly self-government in India. So it was already, the empire was starting to fray a little bit. So the 1924 British Empire exhibition was as I say, massive expo in Wembley, or in Wembley, northwest London, Middlesex. 27 million visitors attended the British Empire exhibition that opened on the 23rd of April 1924, ran through into 1925, and in that period 27 million visitors came along. Never made any money. It's created these white elephants, a bit like the what's now the O2, the Millennium Dome. Great idea, just shame it didn't make some cash, sort of thing. And it's the same with the Empire exhibition. 56 territories out of the 58 territories that Britain ruled had some sort of presence at the British Empire exhibition. There were palaces. The biggest exhibition room, there were lots of different palaces that were designed, was the Palace of Engineering. There were souvenir shops. You could buy soap at the British Empire exhibition. It was the Peers, the soap makers. They had their own Palace of Beauty, and you could buy stuff there. It's good to see commercialism alive and well in the 1920s, isn't it? All the catering on site was franchised and a monopoly to the Lions tea houses. So they were there, except for one. In the Indian exhibition, or part of the exhibition, the Indians provided their own culinary extravaganza. And funnily enough, Lions tea houses weren't really good at producing Indian curries. And Veeraswamy and Co. produced the curries there. And Veeraswamy and Co. actually went on to establish the first ever Indian restaurant in Britain designed for non-Indians. In other words, slightly anglicised Indian food, which of course is what we all get nowadays down at the curry house, and we think it's Indian. But obviously most Indians would tell you it's nothing like that. And certainly in my past, when I travelled in Pakistan, a biryani in Pakistan is nothing like the biryanis that I had in Birmingham and have had since then. Other things that happened were Edward Elgar wrote his Empire March for the opening ceremony. And indeed, at the opening ceremony, of course, George V opened it. I said I was going to mention him, the current king's great-grandfather, Queen Elizabeth II's grandfather. But George V opened it on the 23rd of April 1924. He actually opened it in a bit of a publicity stunt to show sort of the worldwide empire. He sent a telegraph to the empire, and it went round the world from telegraph station to telegraph station, out of London, out from Wembley, around the world. It arrived back at Wembley and was brought to him by a messenger in 1 minute, 20 seconds. Pretty cool, isn't it? Pretty cool stunt. Not as good as the Queen Elizabeth II jumping out of an aeroplane with James Bond, but yeah, not far off. So a great opening ceremony. It was held in Wembley Stadium. Wembley Stadium was the centrepiece construction of the exhibition. It was built as a sports facility, not actually initially as the home of international football, but as they thought it'd be that international rugby match was played here at the time, and there was a running track, and of course, very soon afterwards, in 1924, there was the FA Cup final, famous FA Cup final played here. But probably, Wembley Stadium was the only survivor, really, from the Empire exhibition of 1924 and 1925. And interestingly, of course, the stadium in 1925 was host to a big 1924 was host to a big imperial scout jamboree. Scouts from all around the world, all around the British Empire, shall I say, but all around the world, came to a massive jamboree held at the Wembley Stadium. And it was the biggest ever, at that stage, it was the biggest ever gathering of scouts ever up until that time, which is interesting. Just on that one, I know those of you who are subscribed to my newsletter, and those of you who are on my patrons over on the History Chat channel .com will know that my son Jack actually received his King Scout Award last Sunday. It was actually at Windsor Castle, which we've been talking all about with regard to things like the St George's Day and Edward III with his Knights of the Garter. Massive parade, 500 scouts parading in the quadrant at Windsor Castle. Most people don't get there. They actually had the band of the dismounted household cavalry were playing, so that's pretty impressive, along with the scout band, who were pretty good as well, have to be said. I was expecting a royal Windsor Castle. We guessed someone was going to be there. Obviously not the King or Kate, but someone surely. No, we had the Lord Lieutenant of Berkshire, God bless him. But nevertheless, great parade. He took the salute. Bear Grylls, Chief Scout, was with him as well. Nice bloke, met him in the audience. And then Jack actually went for, we didn't, but all the scouts, including Jack, went for a special service in St George's Chapel, which of course is the resting place of many British monarchs, where a variety of royal weddings have taken place in the past, including Harry and Meghan. And St George's Chapel is the home of the Knights of the Garter that we mentioned just now. So there you go. Right, time is cracking on. How are we doing? Someone loves English style Indian food. Thank you, Leslie. And you made the comment there as well, Leslie. First World Wide Web via the telegraph. I think we forget, don't we? That's just how telegraph feels really antiquated now. But actually how incredible it was to be able to send messages that fast around the world. And how slow communications were until then. As Lord Chelmsford was hoping to prove when he invaded Zululand, and was hoping that the message he'd be able to do the invasion before the British government told him off for invading a supposedly friendly country, Zulus. And of course, it all went horribly wrong, didn't it? Balti curry was invented in Birmingham. Thank you very much, Uncle Heavy. I'm not sure if it was or wasn't, but it's certainly the Balti that we now have. I don't quite know, but Balti and Pakistan very closely together. Anyway, folks, let's keep rolling with what's happened in British history this week. Be remiss of me not to mention on the 24th of April, 1916, the Easter Rising started in Dublin. Obviously, a rising of Irish nationalists led by Patrick Pearse. About 2,000 to 3,000 Irish nationalists armed themselves, tried to take over key buildings in Dublin, failed actually with most of the major strategic buildings locations they wanted to take over, but ended up the most significant, of course, was the General Post Office in Dublin. Something like 15,000, 16,000 British troops were brought into the city, including artillery. A gunboat was brought up the river to take on the rebels. And heavy fighting in Dublin. Something like 66, I think it was, Irish Republicans, nationalists were killed in the fighting. Something like 3 times that number were killed. British soldiers were either killed or wounded. And but the biggest casualty rate was actually amongst civilians. Over half the casualties in the Easter Rising were actually civilians caught in the crossfire, not least from reasonably indiscriminate bombardment by the British artillery. And at the time of the Easter Rising, many people, when the nationalists sort of raised the tricolour and declared independence, many people in Dublin were poo-pooed them, either were ambivalent or even anti. And it was one of those classics. But the heavy-handed nature of the British response, British government response, actually drove many Irish people. Up until then, the Irish Home Rule / independence movement had been very political, hadn't been military, hadn't really been military since the Fenians back in the 19th century. And it was very much actually the response of the British response to that, and indeed as well a fear from many Irish people that there was going to be conscription in light of the losses at the Battle of the Somme, that conscription had been introduced in mainland Britain, and there was a worry it was going to be introduced in Ireland, and that many people that really didn't have an allegiance to the king were going to be forced to fight for king and country. And those two things together really sort of reignited both the Irish Republican movement and also, I suppose you could call it, the militant Irish Republican movement. And within within 4 years, we had a major war of independence going on in Ireland, which eventually resulted in the Irish Free State era, which is now the Irish Republic or the Republic of Ireland, the split minus the 6 counties in the north. So I don't want to dwell too much on the Easter Rising. It's something I would like to do at some stage. I appreciate, highly sensitive, have to do it in a sensitive way. But I think it's something that, again, most Brits don't know, and most historians don't go there because it's a bit too iffy, isn't it? And you're likely to have more hate comments on YouTube than positive comments. So yeah, watch this space. It's not top of my list, but it's something I'd like to cover at some stage in the future. Hi, Charlie Manson. Nice to see you up there in Yorkshire. And Uncle Heavy, the execution of prisoners from the uprising catastrophically damaged the British cause. I said 66 Irish Republicans were killed in the fighting. A further 16 were executed by the British. And there was also an event this week in 1916 where 3 Irish journalists were also summarily executed as well. So yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? How you can almost win a military conflict and lose the political battle. And to a certain extent, I guess you could argue, wasn't that very similar to the Tet Offensive in Vietnam, where militarily the American forces and the South Vietnamese forces had won. But back home in America, that was probably the event that turned the public against the Vietnam War. Similar sort of thing going on in Ireland. So there you go. Oddball the Fourth, find the Irish Civil War and April Rising, very interesting topic. Yeah, very interesting. And of course, the Irish Civil War is an interesting topic in its own right. Just how the divisions in Ireland, and of course the death of Michael Collins, the assassination of Michael Collins, who had signed the independence/peace agreement, peace treaty with the British, and famously, of course, Churchill said, "This is the death sentence of the British Empire," to which I think Collins basically said, "This is actually my death sentence," because he knew that there were going to be unforgiving Republicans who would never agree to the partition of Ireland, and the fact that Collins had signed that agreement. Anyway, we're heading off down a rabbit hole if we're not careful. But Uncle Heavy is saying something, and I haven't seen it. If you go anywhere near the, and I haven't got the rest of the thing there, but there you go. Right. Interestingly, 24th of April, 1986, we talked all about, right at the beginning of Queen Elizabeth II, born not in line for the throne because her uncle, Edward VIII, would have had the throne, or did have the throne. He was king, never crowned, but king. And obviously he gave up, famously abdicated in favour of Wallis Simpson, to be married to Wallis Simpson. 24th of April, 1986, Wallis Simpson finally dies. Died in France. She's buried. Of course, I won't go into all the Wallis Simpson abdication thing. Fascinating bit of history. A lot of shenanigans going on there. And if you believe it was all just about the fact that the British people didn't want, or Church of England in particular, didn't want a divorcee marrying the king, I think that's a very, very liberal way of looking at the abdication crisis. But nevertheless, became Duchess of Windsor. She died on the 24th of April, 1986. Not that long ago, really. She's buried at Frogmore, at the Royal Cemetery at Frogmore, Windsor Castle. I've got all these little segues. Did I tell you, Chap was a King Scout? He got his award this week at Anyway, 25th of April. Let's go back in time. We've done a bit of Easter Rising. We've done a bit of Wallis Simpson. We've done a bit British Empire exhibition. This is all 20th century stuff, isn't it? Let's go back to the Middle Ages. 25th of April, 1464. The Battle of Hedgeley Moor in the Wars of the Roses. Pitted the Yorkists and the Lancastrians against each other. Interestingly, it was minor. It was 2 magnates rather than kings or claimants to the throne fighting each other. This was John Neville, brother of Richard Neville, Warwick the Kingmaker. He was leading the Yorkists up in Northumberland against Henry Beaufort, the Duke of Somerset, who the Beauforts were part of the Lancastrian, well, illegitimate Lancastrian family. So he was leading the Lancastrians. Major defeat for the Lancastrians. John Neville was victorious, and one of the people killed on the Lancastrian side. Very interesting. The Nevilles were the up-and-coming family in England at the time. They fancied they envied some lands up in the north, and their biggest rivals in the north of England were the historic Percy family, Percys of Alnwick Castle, etc. The Percys were on the side of the Lancastrians, and the Nevilles were naturally on the side of the Yorkists. One of the people killed or the main person killed actually at the Battle of Hedgeley Moor was Sir Ralph Percy, one of the Percy family. He actually was the custodian of Bamborough Castle in Northumbria. And for those of you who know who Bamborough, then obviously if you're fans of Uhtred and the Last Kingdom, that's the same castle, although set in fiction, of course. So John Neville was to die at the Battle of Barnet, along with his brother Richard Neville, Warwick the Kingmaker, later in the Wars of the Roses. Same date, 25th of, let me just quickly look over there, sorry. Thank you, Expat. Rome was founded, 21st of April, thank you. Right, let me keep on with what I've got here, only because we could be here all day, and you know that these Friday sessions always overrun. So, 25th of April, 1942, the Baedeker raids begin. These were Luftwaffe raids on Britain that were... They were in response. The RAF had bombed a beautiful German city on the Baltic coast called Lübeck, great Hansic port. Had destroyed it or destroyed large parts of it. And so basically Hitler ordered that British cultural cities, forget the Coventrys, the Liverpools, the London, the East End of London, the London Docks, Portsmouth Harbour, all that stuff. Let's go after. If you're going to bomb blinking Lübeck, we're going to take out your cultural cities as well. And they came up with a list. And there's always been this thing that the Germans went through the tourist guide, the Baedeker guide, which is a bit like the Lonely Planet guide of the 1920s, 1930s, and indeed before, and picked out key cultural targets in Britain. And they proceeded to bomb them. On the night of the 25th of April, 1942, the Luftwaffe carried out raids on Bath and Exeter. Actually hit Exeter first, Bath just hours afterwards. About 80 people killed in Exeter. The picture on the front, the thumbnail for today's talk is a picture of the aftermath at Exeter. Exeter was to suffer a second raid a few days later. Actually, more people were killed in that second raid, and large parts of the area around the historic cathedral in Exeter were levelled. Beautiful city. If you see pictures of Exeter before the Second World War, beautiful. Bath, the same night, 25th of April, Bath was hit, 400 people killed in Bath. The Baedeker raids then continued over the next month. As I say, Exeter was hit a second time. Norwich was attacked, York was attacked, Canterbury were bombed. So that's the Baedeker raids. And again, it could be a really interesting little talk to give or a video to do on YouTube, because it's not one of those ones. I'm not sure if Mark Felton's ever bothered with one on that one, but just an interesting one, just on the cultural war and bombing of cultural sites. And these cities, as I say, some beautiful parts of these ancient cities were destroyed in these Baedeker raids. Just reading some of the comments again. John, thank you very much for yours. The left out Hull, the most bombed city in England. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Right. 26th of April. I can't remember. Yes, we've also this week, 26th of April. This is going to be a really different one. Didn't Michael Portillo use Baedeker on his train films? He might have done. Baedeker makes several appearances in various plays and things, actually, back in, pre-First World War and interwar period. People refer to Baedeker in a similar way that we would refer to Lonely Planet or something now. Yeah. Right, 26th of April, which is today, isn't it? I'm going to give you something slightly different. 26th of April, 1794. the Battle of Beaumont. And you're thinking, what the heck is the Battle of Beaumont? It was fought in the Revolutionary Wars, the French Revolutionary Wars. It was fought in Flanders, so now part of Belgium. It was fought between the forces of Great Britain, allied with the Habsburgs, the Austrians, against the French Revolutionary Army. It was actually commanded by, it pitted about 20,000 Brits and Austrians against 30,000 French. The battle was commanded, or the Allied force was commanded by Frederick, Duke of York, the brother of the future George IV, the Prince Regent, so son of George III, second son of George III. So Frederick, Duke of York. Frederick had only been made a full. He had joined the army. He had been commissioned back in about 10 years beforehand. 1793, been made a full general, and he commanded this army here. It was a significant victory for the Duke of York. Battle of Beaumont. Something like 7,000 out of the 30,000 French were killed or wounded. About 1,500 British and Austrians out of their 20,000 force were killed or wounded. The whole Flanders campaign didn't really go very far. He was then defeated at a follow-up battle, and eventually he and his army were evacuated from the German port of Bremen. But interestingly, as he marched around Flanders, people were unsure as to how good a military commander he was, and his role as the commander in the British Army in the Flanders campaign has given rise to many to believe that the nursery rhyme, the Grand Old Duke of York, was about him. The Grand Old Duke of York, he had 10,000 men. He marched them up to the top of the hill and he marched them down again. In other words, he was stomping around Flanders, but not actually making much of an impact. He ended up being Commander-in-Chief of the British Army, actually. And whilst he had never been fantastically successful as a military commander on the ground, bar the Battle of Beaumont, he actually was a very strong administrator, and he put into place a lot of the reforms in the British Army, which actually then were to benefit Arthur Wellesley in the Peninsular Campaign. He also took a very keen interest in the common soldier, which is quite interesting for a bloke who's the brother of the Prince Regent, the man who squandered money like there was no tomorrow on things like the Brighton Pavilion. And in particular, he set up a school for orphans of soldiers, which became the Royal Military School, which is now over in Kent somewhere. I can't quite remember where, but he set this up. So he ended up being chief commander-in-chief for most of the Napoleonic Wars, although he did have to step down at one stage because his mistress was selling commissions in the army to anyone who would pay her good money, on the belief that her lover, the Duke of York, would then give them the said commission in the army. And when this got out, there was a huge scandal. There was a parliamentary inquiry. He actually was cleared of any wrongdoing himself. He never received any money. But interestingly, that mistress, and he was therefore reinstated. Once that happened, the Prince Regent, his brother, reinstated him as Commander-in-Chief of the Army. Interestingly, the mistress was a lady called Mary Ann Clark. Mary Ann Clark's descendant was the novelist Daphne du Maurier. So there you go. So where are we at? 7 minutes to the hour. We've rattled through a fair bit today, haven't we, folks? How are we doing? Okay, bit of the thing. We're talking about Bradshaw's, not Baedeker. Fair enough. The Duke of York's Royal Military School. Absolutely. That's the one. Thank you very much indeed, Curie Library. That is the school that was set up. It was originally called the Orphans' Asylum, the Duke of York's Asylum. But strangely enough, that got changed to something slightly nicer, like the Duke of York's Royal Military School. Thank you very much. Right, 27th of April, 1908, the London Olympics opened. First time London had hosted the Olympics, first of 3 occasions. Of course, actually, London wasn't destined to host these Olympics. The Olympics of 1908 were supposed to be held in Rome. But Rome couldn't organise them. There'd been an eruption on Mount Vesuvius, and Rome felt unable to, for a variety of reasons, to organise the Olympics. So London came in pretty late in the day to host the 1908 Olympics. First time in an Olympics that a purpose-built venue was used for the Olympics. Up until then, the cities that had hosted it, they'd sort of made do with whatever was around. London was the first venue to actually have a purpose-built Olympic village and Olympic stadium. That stadium was White City in West London, which continued as a sports venue right up until well after the Second World War. 22 nations took part. Not all the events took place at White City. Shooting took place down at the National Shooting Range at Bisley. Rowing took place at Henley. Surprise, surprise. Sailing took place up at, I think it was at Ryde. I stand to be corrected, but it's down on the Solent. Sort of similar to how the London Olympics in 2012 used some of the other facilities around them. But anyway, 22 nations, that was all that participated in the 1908 Olympics. 2,000 plus athletes participated, half of whom came from GB. Nothing like home advantage, is there? So the Brits provided half the contingent. There was something like 350 from France. The third biggest nation were the Swedes. Behind them were the Netherlands, and finally the Americans rocked up in fifth place with a fifth number of attendees, competitors. Probably the most famous thing that happened from the London Olympics of 1908 was that the marathon distance was changed. Originally, it was 26 miles, which was the historic 26 miles after the messenger ran after the Battle of Marathon in ancient Greece. This was now changed to 26 miles and 385 yards. And that was because they wanted the marathon, they wanted the finishing line right in front of the royal box where King Edward VII would be sitting. And 26 miles left it slightly short. Poor old Edward, tubby old Edward, would have been sort of looking with his binoculars trying to see the finish. So they moved the distance and they moved the finishing line, in front of the royal box. And it obviously extended the race, 26 miles, 385 yards. And that is still the distance of the marathons to this day. And that's how it came about. I love history when you find these little stories about, oh, that's why it happened. Because let's face it, 26 miles, 385 yards is not the figure you'd normally think up, is it, as a race? 1908 marathon, famously, the crowd got to their feet in the stadium when, what's his name? Dorando Pietri from Italy came into the stadium. He was actually a waiter. Restaurant waiter. He was running the Olympics for the Olympic marathon for Italy. Things have changed, haven't they? He came into the stadium. He was absolutely shattered. The crowd rose to their feet, cheering him on. He was so knackered at this stage. He actually ran the stadium, turned the wrong way. People had to shoo him back and point, no, you idiot, turn around, keep going that way. He actually couldn't make it to the line. As he came towards the line with tubby Edward waiting to watch him, Pietro fell down, and several people ran forward from the crowd, and several stewards helped him to his feet and basically helped him and ran him across the line to be the winner of the Olympic gold. Some famous photos of that. The Olympic Committee said, you won because you'd been assisted. You didn't win the race from your own efforts, and they disqualified him. Can you believe that? He was out the front, and because he'd stumbled and fallen, and in the whole Olympic spirit, people had run forward and helped him up. He was disqualified, and actually the gold was given to Johnny Hayes of the USA. Johnny Hayes, it was one of 23 golds the USA won at the 1908 Olympics. Top of the table, strangely enough, with over half the competitors were Great Britain with 56 gold medals at the time, including, I love this one, the tug of war. Tug of war, great one. Rugby was held there. Britain won, football won. They won quite a few shooting competitions, although the Americans did well at shooting. Canadians, I noticed someone here from Canada. You came third. You got the bronze in the team shooting, the military shooting event, it was called. An exhibition, this is a great one. And they have a couple of sports that were exhibiting at the Olympics. In other words, there weren't actually Olympic competitions, but they were exhibiting. One of the sports that was exhibiting them was pistol dueling, where where people shot like in classic dueling, but they shot at a dummy. Never really took off. Never got Olympic status, but it was one at 1908 Olympics being exhibitioned. I wonder why it never took off. So, what was the smallest contingent? Donald Westerdale has asked. Donald, Argentina, one competitor from Argentina in the 1908 Olympics. And QA Library, yeah, Great Britain had about six teams in the tug of war. Britain got all three medals in the tug of war, QA Library. All three were police teams. It was the London Police won the gold. I think Liverpool was silver. And I can't remember from the life of me who was third, but basically they were a police team as well. So there you go. I don't know what happened to the Argentinian contestant before you asked me, Donald. Haven't got a clue. Right, folks. Last thing I want to touch on today is this is a week, of course, where the Anzacs landed at Gallipoli. Don't want to go into that in too much detail because I'd like to do that as a proper story at some stage, okay? But a nod to the Anzacs. One of those defining moments in Australian and New Zealand history and cultural history and the story of a nation. Because interestingly, of course, there were more Brits and French actually serving at Gallipoli, or the Dardanelles campaign, than there were Australians and New Zealanders. But comparatively, the casualty rates for the numbers of men who'd come and for the amount of men who had actually come from Australia and New Zealand in the first place, for very small populations, made a huge psychological impact down under. So I'd like to do that one in some more detail at a later stage, but a nod to them. Last one for today, though, this is for my American fans in particular, is 27th, or the night of the 27th and then 28th of April 1944, the disaster that was Exercise Tiger. Exercise Tiger took place in both. Well, Exercise Tiger was it was two-part. It was landings at Slapton Sands in Devon. A bit of a misnomer because Slapton Sands there's no sand there at all. It was all pebbles. It's like Brighton Beach. But it was a practice. They've been practicing there for some time, actually. But it was a practice, probably a dress rehearsal for the landings on Utah Beach in Normandy on D-Day. And two disasters happened in the same event, okay? Principally, this is American troops, obviously, because it was a practice for Utah Beach. They were out at sea. The first one was that they were going to land at Utah. Now, Eisenhower decided that the troops needed to really get a real feel for what it was going to be like landing under fire at Utah. So he ordered the naval batteries to bombard the beach so that there'd be the smell of cordite and shell holes and all this crap there as the men came ashore. They then had a bit of a change of plan and said, "Oh, actually, we're going to delay whilst we really give it a good shelling. We are going to delay the landing craft going in, obviously, because we don't want anyone killed in friendly fire." As ever, classic communications. Some of the landing craft didn't get this message, and so happily landed on Slapton Sands whilst they were still being bombarded by the American Navy, and several hundred Americans were killed in this friendly fire by themselves. Highly embarrassing, obviously covered up. You couldn't really tell, or you couldn't make it headline news, could it? To everyone, we're going to be landing on the coasts of Europe very soon, and it's probably going to be a bloodbath because just look how badly we've done the dress rehearsals. You're not going to do that, are you, in a military campaign? That night, despite the disaster on Slapton Sands, the exercise continued out in Lyme Bay, which is sort of off the coast of Dorset in the English Channel. Despite having a protection from both US naval and also Royal Naval ships, several German speedboats came in and managed to get through the cordon and attacked the landing craft as they were lying in the water next to their ships that they were coming off. Something in the region of 700 men were drowned, or hundreds were drowned or killed, or died of hypothermia in the cold waters of the Channel that night. The two disasters together, Slapton Sands and what's called the Battle of Lyme Bay, is accounted for over 700 American servicemen killed that night. That was more American servicemen than actually died on Utah Beach on D-Day 1944, the event that they were practicing for. Obviously hushed up until later in the war. Eventually, the casualties were released in about August, and Eisenhower basically allowed them to be released as part of the general casualties of the D-Day operations, even though this was nearly 6 weeks before D-Day. It was just all swept together and sort of swept under the carpet. A fascinating little story, and again, maybe one I'd like to tell that at some stage. I know Mark Felton has told that one in the past, but one of my favourite is I go down to Slapton and that part of the South Hams area of Devon. So one thing I've got on Mark Felton is I've got some live footage from down there on the beach and of the memorial down there. So maybe I should do one about Exercise Tiger, the practice for Utah that went horribly wrong. That, folks, is it's not a whistle-stop tour. It's just over an hour's tour of what happened this week in British history. That's part of the problem you have when you have a country's history that goes back well over 1,000 years, isn't it? There's always something you can find. Some of those you probably knew, some of those you didn't. I hope you found them interesting. As a matter of interest, if I was going to do a talk about any of those subjects, 15, 25-minute talk, whatever the video length of the video, which ones would you like me, or which one or ones would you like me to do a video about? Could you just type a comment in the comments, and I'll get a bit of a straw poll. I appreciate it. That was a quick gallop through British history. It certainly was. So Invisible Rays kept in there. Slapton Sands or Scampton Sands, but Slapton Sands. I will run with Slapton Sands as a vote. Well, anyone else? Is there any of those? And in fact, if there aren't any, then obviously keep your powder dry. Slapton Sands, Tiger. Okay. You ask all the bloody hard questions, Chris. I mean, personally, the 1980s. I think actually that for me, the British Empire exhibition is quite an interesting story, because most people haven't got a clue. Most people do not know how the old Wembley Stadium ever got there in the first place, do they? It was just iconic with those twin towers. Those twin towers, by the way, were designed to look like Mughal towers from India. Yeah. Slapton Sands, Operation Tiger. Leslie, is that Douglas Bader? Is that who you're asking about? I've got Douglas Bader on my list. Sarah Jane, you've just got here, so you're going to go for everything. By all means, watch the replay. It'll be coming any moment now. Effectively, I think it gets put up by YouTube. It just buffers it or something, and then they put it on YouTube, so it'll be up in a moment. Leslie, Slapton Sands out of what is offered. Leslie, that's such a backhanded compliment or vote, isn't it? Thanks, mate. Yeah, someone said the Empire exhibition. Terry Murphy almost tried for murder. Is that John Paul Jones? Are you talking about John Paul Jones? Interesting one. Yeah, okay, fine. The Battle of Lundy's Lane, bloodiest battle of the War of 1812. Okay, is it even bloodier than New Orleans? That's interesting. Okay, thank you very much. And Charlie, I knew you'd come back about the Queen Victoria's Android or Apple question. Look, folks, thank you very much. It's always nice just to get a bit of a feel for people when they're saying what could be a good topic for the future. Always nice to do something that I think people might enjoy. So no offence taken, Leslie. I appreciate all your help and support. Thank you. And all your comments on each video that comes out on YouTube. Right, folks, do you know what? We've done an hour. I've done a whole lot of British history. As we've been talking, I've done 2 pints of water. And guess what? I need the loo. So that seems a really good time to say thank you very much for joining me today. Have a great weekend. No, Charlie Manson, it might not have been you, but someone said, was this gin? No, it's not. But rest assured, later this evening, I think it will need to be a pint of beer, hopefully at the Huntsman in Kempsey, Worcester. But who knows where it might be. But I hope you have a great weekend, whatever you're doing. Hope the sun shines on you. Keep well, and I'll see you again next week. Until then, have a great weekend.